Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland outside William Ewart Gladstone's house. Well, he had many of them, but this is one of his townhouses on Carlton House Terrace. As you can see, it's a very handsome edifice built in Regency style, so the late 18th century, very close to Carlton House, where the Prince Regent himself lived. So, who was Gladstone? Well, he's born in Liverpool in 1809 in a house that still stands on Arnold Street. And he was born to Scottish parents. His father was Sir John Gladstone, a highly successful merchant from Leith. Leith was then not considered part of Edinburgh, and the Gladstones family had an S on the end of those days. They owned very extensive plantations in the Bahamas, which is why some people there still have the surname Gladstone. So Sir John Gladstone's later dropped the S, became Gladstone. So he made his fortune by exploiting people in the cruelest possible fashion in the West Indies. They were held in slavery. William Ewart Gladstone was one of 16 children, and he then went to Eton and later to Christ Church, Oxford. Christ Church was considered the noblest of all colleges, and Gladstone joined the Oxford Union Society, which is a debating society, had not been founded very long before. He became treasurer of the society. He aspired to be president, but never rose to that rank. We have a very detailed account of his youth because he kept a diary, and he'd say he sat beside the Earl of Lincoln at luncheon, and then he read a few pages of Thucydides, and then he read 200 lines of Petrarch or something like that. So he was a man who said Christianity was his pole star. He was intensely religious, even for an age of faith. One of the hot topics of discussion at Oxford when Gladstone was up was slavery. Should it be abolished or not? And Gladstone, he advocated slavery with the most ferocious obscurantism. He was also against the Great Reform Act of 1832. He felt that even the middle class shouldn't be allowed to vote. The right to vote in parliamentary elections ought to be only for people of very substantial property. In modern terms, the Gladstone family had a fortune which would be equivalent to hundreds of millions of pounds. So then he was elected an MP for Newark. He was very close to Lord Lincoln, and Lord Lincoln had many estates around there, and those who owned landed estates could more or less guarantee that their hand-picked man would be elected. So he was a Tory, indeed described as the rising hope of the stern, unbending Tories. But later he broke away from them. He had been in favour of Catholic emancipation in 1829, though he agonised over the issue. In the 1840s, he had a nervous breakdown over the Maynooth grant. Should the government give more money to Maynooth, which is a seminary in Ireland for Catholic priests? He voted for it, but he felt terribly guilty. He was a member of the Church of England, an evangelical Anglican as well, and felt terribly conflicted about this. But anyway, he embraced the cause of free trade in the 1840s, get rid of the corn laws, and make bread cheaper for the poor. And later he helped to found the Liberal Party in 1861, when the only thing they could agree on was Italian unification and independence. It was founded only about a quarter of a mile from here in St James's. So he was 4 times Prime Minister. When he first became Prime Minister in 1868, he was at Harden, his estate in Wales. I know it's spelt Hawarden, but pronounced Harden, where he was chopping trees. And the news came that Queen Victoria was asking him to form a government, and Gladstone announced, "My mission is to pacify Ireland." Well, in the short term, he was to fail in that regard. But he had 4 ministries, as I've said. He tried to get the first Irish Home Rule Bill through, and that failed in the House of Commons. He previously had been adamantine in his opposition to Irish Home Rule. But a voyage around Sweden and Norway at that time convinced him that devolution was the right solution, as he'd seen it work so happily when Norway was devolved from the Kingdom of Sweden. And later in 1893, the second Home Rule Bill failed in the House of Lords. So the next year he stepped down from Parliament, and he died in 1898. He was a man of the most outstanding intellect, and he wrote many magisterial books, such as the relations between the state and the church, especially with regard to the universities. So the Liberal Party under him was a somewhat rainbow alliance. Although he was a high Anglican by the end of his life, not an evangelical, a lot of people who voted for him were non-conformists. That's to say, Protestants outside the Church of England, Baptists, Methodists, Quakers and so forth. The temperance movement was involved with the Liberal Party. People in Great Britain who supported Home Rule for Ireland were involved. Those who believed in free trade, things of that nature. So then he died in 1898. He was a man who had a signal impact on British politics, and was remembered even in the 1960s by people who voted for him who were still alive, who thought it was so magnificent. Some of his sons became members of Parliament. Herbert Gladstone was quite distinguished. One of his grandsons was killed in the First World War. So both his son and his grandson became president of the Oxford Union, one of the few things which Gladstone did not manage to do. That's all for the moment.